Chile's President-elect Gabriel Boric has called on Congress to expedite the approval of a pardon bill for the political prisoners detained in the major anti-government protests of 2019. Palestinians protested the arrest of 5 students and wounding of one of them by Israeli occupation forces at the Sadc University in the West Bank. At the start of a 2-day summit in the Malarian capital, the Southern African Development Community noted progress in tackling the insurgency in northern Mozambique. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Chile, where President-elect Gabriel Boric called on Congress to expedite the approval of a pardon bill for the political prisoners detained in the major anti-government protests of 2019. Boric stated that the best possible agreement is being pursued and noted that just 2 votes are required from right-wing senators in order to secure its approval. The President-elect stressed that his government is committed to establishing a broad dialogue with all sectors in order to find common ground and avoid tensions and divisions. Boric emphatically called on senators to resolve the issue of the ongoing detention of mainly youths during the month of January, stressing it cannot wait any longer. Argentine President Alberto Fernandez announced that the International Monetary Fund intends to impose an economic adjustment program on the country, which his government will not accept. In an interview with a local radio station, the head of state stressed that his government remains firm in the search for an agreement with the IMF that is beneficial to Argentina, while also ruling out the possibility of the country falling into default in the payment of the debt, at least for now. However, Fernandez announced that the International Financial Organization continues to seek to impose a program with more structural adjustments, which will compromise economic growth and further harm the population. The IMF agreed to a request for a record loan of more than $50 million from the previous administration of Mauricio Macri, while the current government has continued to seek a renegotiation of the deal. The trial against the former de facto President and 9 others accused of being behind the coup perpetrated in Bolivia in 2019 will begin shortly. According to the Deputy Minister of Justice, the order to open the trial will be issued on Wednesday, and in accordance with criminal procedure, the oral and public stage of the process will begin within 45 days. The case surrounds the responsibility of Agnes for the previous measures she took as a senator before the constitutional disruption of 2019, including the crimes of breach of duties and resolutions contrary to the political constitution of the state and law. The Bolivian Public Prosecutor's Office is demanding a 10-year prison sentence for the coup-plotting leader. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel denounced the human rights violations committed at the Guantanamo prison on the 20th anniversary of its establishment on the Cuban territory illegally occupied by the United States. The Cuban head of state condemned the constant violations and abuses committed at the military base that Washington maintains on the eastern part of the island, despite constant demands for the return of the territory. 2 decades after the first detainees arrived at Guantanamo Bay, a group of United Nations experts urged the U.S. to finally close the site that has seen unrelenting human rights violations, which they say is a stain on Washington's stated commitment to the rule of law. The experts also called on the U.S. government to detainees home or to a safe third country and to provide remedy and reparation for their torture and arbitrary detention. Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega was inaugurated for a 4th consecutive term in office on Monday. President Ortega secured a landslide victory in the November 7th general elections with more than 76% of the vote. The ruling Sandinista National Liberation Front also secured another landslide victory in November, increasing its parliamentary majority. The swearing-in ceremony this Monday took place in Revolution Square, northwest of the capital Managua. Delegations from at least 21 countries, including heads of state, and precisely on the day of President Daniel Ortega's inauguration, the United States announced new sanctions against 6 Nicaraguan officials based on trumped-up accusations of state acts of violence, disinformation and targeting of independent media. The U.S. Treasury sanctions targeted the Minister of Defense, as well as officials of the military, the company overseeing telecommunications and postal services, and the state-owned Nicaraguan mining company. Argentine government authorities issued alerts in several provinces on Tuesday following the heat wave sweeping the South American country. The National Meteorological Service reported that the north of the province of Mendoza is under a red alert, given the very high risk to health posed by the forecast extreme temperatures, while most of the rest of the provinces remain under orange and yellow alerts. Record temperatures are expected to continue, most of the countries experiencing the record heat, with maximum temperatures reaching 42 degrees Celsius. More than 1,800 asylum seekers died or went missing in the Mediterranean Sea in 2021. The figure was provided by European organisations that monitor human rights compliance. According to the institutions, the number of migrants dead or missing in the Mediterranean last year was 20% higher than that recorded in 2020. Researchers point out that strict European anti-immigration policies favour the increase of deaths in the Mediterranean and announce that many nations of the continent return asylum seekers to their countries of origin, regardless of the dangers faced there. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Palestinians protesting the arrest of 5 students and wounding of one of them by Israeli occupation forces at the Sadc University entrance in the West Bank were met with repression on Tuesday. The illegal Israeli occupation forces made the arrest on Monday during a raid on the university, during which they also confiscated models from the Faculty of Science. According to investigations conducted by the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, an Israeli special unit operating undercover and dressed as Palestinians sneaked into Sadc, northern Ramallah, in a white bus. The unit stationed near the western gate of the university and stopped 5 students as they stepped out of their car at the gates. The students tried to run towards the university, but the Israeli unit chased and opened fire at them, wounding one. According to the Palestinian Prisoner Society, a local NGO advocating for prisoners' rights, there are currently more than 4,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, including at least 600 Sikh inmates. Most are imprisoned following trials in Israeli military courts which do not meet the minimum requirements of fairness as required by international law or the legal norms practiced in even nominally democratic countries. In addition, there are some 500 Palestinians being held without trial or due process in an internationally condemned practice known in Israel as administrative detention. The struggle for freedom by Palestine's political prisoners, including through the use of hunger strikes, is a cause that unites Palestinians from different factions. On Tuesday, Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev announced the withdrawal of peacekeeping troops of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, given the restoration of order in the country. The military contingent arrived in the Central Asian nation last week following a request from the Kazakh president in the face of violent destabilization attempts and foreign-backed acts of terrorism. Tokayev said the troops would withdraw within the next 10 days. The president explained that the acute phase of the counter-terrorist operation had been completed and the situation in all regions is stable, thus declaring the main mission of the CSTO peacekeeping forces to have been successfully completed.
We, as the Turkish state, stand by Kazakhstan. We fully support Kazakhstan for the re-establishment of stability in the country. Peace and stability in Kazakhstan is not only important for our region and our organization, but for global peace.
The Kazakh parliament on Tuesday approved the appointment of Alikan Smyilov, aged 49, as the country's new prime minister, a post he was nominated for by President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. Smyilov took over as acting prime minister on January 5th amid the violent unrest that shook the country and led to the dismissal of the full cabinet headed by Askar Mamin, under whom he served as deputy prime minister. The Five-Nation Organization of Turkic States, of which Kazakhstan is a member, held an extraordinary meeting on Tuesday via video conference to discuss the situation in the member state. The Turkish Foreign Minister said his nation was ready to mobilize all of its means to help Kazakhstan.
We, as a Turkish state, stand by Kazakhstan. We fully support Kazakhstan for the re-establishment of stability in the country. Peace and stability in Kazakhstan is not only important for our region and our organization, but for global peace. Kazakhstan has the ability, experience, and state tradition to overcome this crisis. From now on, we stand by Kazakhstan with all our means, and we are ready to mobilize all our means.
At the invitation of Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the Turkish and Iranian foreign ministers will pay visits to China on January 12th and 14th, respectively, as announced this Tuesday.
State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi will hold talks with Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu and have in-depth exchanges of views on bilateral relations and international and regional issues of common concern. In recent years, China and Turkey have maintained high-level exchanges in communication at all levels and achieved fruitful results in practical cooperations in various fields. State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi will hold talks with Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian. China and Iran enjoy profound traditional friendship. Under the leadership of the two heads of state, China-Iran relations have achieved remarkable development in recent years. The two sides have firmly supported each other on issues concerning each other's core interests, steadily promoted practical cooperation in various fields, and maintained close communication and coordination in international and regional affairs.
Chinese and Russian authorities have expressed the intention to deepen the strategic cooperation between their two nations this year. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov held a telephone conversation in which they called for cooperation and joint efforts to protect the legitimate rights and interests of both sides and maintain regional peace and stability. The top diplomat stressed that Beijing and Moscow should deepen coordination and cooperation to counteract the presence of external forces meddling in the internal affairs of Central Asian countries, highlighting the recent events in Kazakhstan. They expressed a commitment to preventing so-called color revolutions in the region and Western to spread chaos. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said Tuesday there had been significant progress in tackling an insurgency in northern Mozambique after a multinational force was deployed there last year. Ramaphosa, who chairs the Defence and Security section of the Southern African Development Community, provided an update on the situation at a two-day summit in the Malawian capital called to assess developments in the region. Members of the bloc and Rwanda stepped in 6 months ago to assist the Mozambican army, bringing in more than 3,000 troops. The gas-rich province of Cabo Delgado, which borders Tanzania, has been gripped by attacks by Islamic State-linked militants since 2017. At least 3,500 people have been killed and around 820,000 have fled their homes.
Samim, in Mozambique, significant progress has been made. The security situation in Cabo Delgado is improving, which has allowed for some internally displaced people to return to their homes and resume their normal lives. Whilst we note the gains of this mission, there have also been some challenges. We are saddened by the casualties suffered by Samim and the Mozambican Defense Force. I wish to extend our deepest condolences to the governments of Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, the United Republic of Tanzania, and my own country, South Africa.
Mali's military leader, Assimi Goïta, stated that he remains open to dialogue with the Economic Community of West African States after the bloc imposed sanctions on Bamako over delayed elections. In a sharp escalation after months of simmering diplomatic tensions, leaders from the bloc on Sunday agreed to close borders with the Sahel state and impose a trade embargo. The West African bloc also agreed to cut financial aid, freeze Mali's assets at the Central Bank of West African States, and to recall their ambassadors from the country. The coordinated action followed a proposal by Mali's military government last month to stay in power for up to 5 years before staging elections, despite international demands that it respect a promise to hold elections in February. Meanwhile, a spokeswoman for Guinea's ruling junta announced that the West African country was keeping its borders open with neighbouring Mali, despite the announcement by the Economic Community of West African States that it would impose sanctions and border closures. Guinea was suspended from the bloc after soldiers seized power on September 5th last year, and ECOWAS has also imposed sanctions on the country, while reiterating its demand for the unconditional release of President Alpha Condé, who has been under house arrest since his ouster, and the appointment of a civilian prime minister and formation of a transitional government. The man accused of setting a fire that destroyed parts of South Africa's historic Parliament complex faced a new charge of terrorism. Sandile Mafi, aged 49, appeared on Tuesday in a courtroom in Cape Town for a bail hearing when the new charge was added. Mafi was charged with housebreaking with intent to steal, theft, 2 counts of arson and possession of an explosive device when he appeared in court for the first time last week. The Parliament complex was ravaged by a major blaze which started on January 2nd and took firefighters 4 days to completely extinguish. The 130-year-old complex has been the site of the National Legislature since the time of British colonialism in the late 18th century.
To our surprise, only this morning, as you heard the council submitting in court, only this morning they added some other charges, and only this morning they revealed it for the very first time that my client was assessed and there is a documentation to that regard. He will have to be referred for mental observation. We heard the court saying that as well we are at liberty to refer our client to an independent psychiatrist.
In a press conference, the head of the World Health Organization's Europe region said that more than half of people in the continent are on track to contract the Omicron coronavirus variant in the next 2 months if infections continue at current rates.
At this rate, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation forecasts that more than 50% of the population in the region will be infected with Omicron in the next 6 to 8 weeks. 50 of the 50 countries in Europe and Central Asia have now reported cases of Omicron. It is quickly becoming the dominant virus in Western Europe and is now spreading into the Balkans.
Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced Tuesday that borders will remain closed to most foreign nationals until the end of February as the country sees a surge in COVID-19 cases. The PM stated that strict border controls had helped fend off the Omicron variant. At the same time, Japanese authorities are moving to push booster shots as the government plans to set up large-scale vaccination centres to help support the campaign. Okinawa, Yamaguchi and Hiroshima prefectures have gone into a quasi-state of emergency due to COVID-19 surges.
The difference in the infectious status of Omicron variant inside and outside the country is clear, and while taking necessary measures from the viewpoint of humanitarian and national interests, we will maintain the current framework of border measures until the end of February. From March onward, we will utilize the Moderna vaccines that we have secured this time for 18 million people to move forward for the general public. The national government will support the efforts of local governments, such as setting up a large-scale vaccination center by the self-defense forces.
The French city of Lyon saw protests by medical and social workers this Tuesday as part of a national mobilization to demand pay rises and better working conditions. Educators, nurses and radio operators stressed that conditions have worsened in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic at a time when they are under even more pressure to meet increasing needs. They announced that despite being essential workers, their salaries remain low, with many struggling to get by, leading to a massive shortage of personnel.
In the previous wave, we had a capacity of 30 beds in the cardiac ward alone, and now we are down to 25 beds. So you see, that's already 5 less. That's 5 fewer chances for patients, and I'm only talking about my hospital. So imagine at the national level, people are now fed up with being requestioned that they prefer to resign their civil servant status and leave the public service. That's what we are.
What we are asking for is at least 300 euros for all, and health and social action. And what we can see at the moment is the massive degradation of our working conditions, both in health and social action, which is defined very clearly by a massive flight of personnel, and we can no longer respond to a need of the population, not only for care but for educational support of our social action. Since I started about 20 years ago, the salary has not evolved, compared to the cost of living and the recognition, even if it's be symbolic. That means money and cash too.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.